Question, who speaks a second language? Bunch of hands, really nice. I want to speak a second language, and I'm not very good at it. I try to speak Spanish, and when I think about what I want to say, it just doesn't happen the way that I'm imagining. I can do some basic stuff, but really there's this big communication gap because I just don't speak Spanish that well. Now, who here has learned HTML and CSS from Webflow? Who didn't really know about these topics, and now Webflow came along, and now you understand how this works? It's big. This is a new way to communicate on a website. That we learn HTML and we learn CSS, and then the ideas that we have in our head can actually be translated to the published page. That we can come up with these wild ideas of what we want to show visually. And Webflow Designer gives us that tool to communicate with the person that's loading our website. And this is really special. This has changed probably everybody's life in here in some way. If you're here, HTML and CSS has played a role in your professional development. And Webflow helps us with that communication. It's amazing. I love it. And now we have Wized. And Wized is going to help in that same type of communication. That we have these ideas in our head of how can we create this learning platform? How can we create this restaurant ordering system? How can we create this web application that our client is asking for? So we have these ideas in our head, and right now, it's very difficult to translate that to the end user. We need to use a whole bunch of different products, or we need to be really technical and use a lot of code, and we can't get from our head to the end user. It's very difficult or very expensive. And that is where Wized can come in. That it provides that layer of communication between what we want to build and what we can actually build and deliver to the end user. And I believe that Wized will help us learn how APIs work, learn how the communication of data between applications can work. And it's the tool that will help us with that translation. Just like Webflow has helped us with HTML and CSS and made everybody here pro developers. Feels good. So I'm really excited to introduce both of these people here. Jonas is the creator of Wized. And he built this application with the idea of building web apps in Webflow. We don't want to touch the HTML and CSS. That's Webflow. It's perfect. We all love it. We don't need another Webflow. But we need something on top of it to translate those other ideas that we have that Webflow is maybe not set up to do. So that's why Jonas built Wized. And then we have Bailey, who has been the biggest Wiz power user since day one. Really impressive, doing a lot of great work. He's going to be a superstar. Play this back in a year, and that will be a true fact. I know it. And right now, you have the two most experienced people on the planet with Wized, out of like 6 people. But they're pretty good. So I'm now going to leave the presentation up to these two very smart people, and we're going to do some really cool demonstrations with Wized. And really, the only limitation with Wized is the limitation of your knowledge of how the web works. Just like Webflow, that if you really know HTML and CSS and Webflow, it is a true blank canvas. You have the whole world in front of you with Webflow Designer if you understand these concepts. If you don't understand the concepts, Webflow seems to have a lot of limitations. But the more you know, the more open the platform feels. And it's the same way with Wized. We'll show 2 examples, but these are 2 examples out of endless possibilities. So as long as you understand these concepts, you follow the learning paths that we give, you'll be able to build anything. It's a true blank canvas. So that's it. Let's rock and roll. Thank you very much, and welcome to Wized.
All right. Thank you, Joe, for the great introduction. Yeah, it's an honor to be here and to be able to present the new version of Wized. Yeah, I've been working on this product for almost 2 years, since the first MVP. And yeah, it's come a long way. And I think that, yeah, it has evolved and improved over the last years. And I think that this is a version where it really gets simple enough for the masses. So, what do we have here? You see an overview about the Wized configurator, and that's basically the playground that enables you to build those kind of web applications. You have 6 main tabs on the left. First of all, My Apps, Data In, Actions, Data Out, Authentication, and Settings. Those are the main panels in which you can basically control the settings of your web application. My Apps speaks for itself. It's your integrations. Data In are requests to load data from a source. Actions enables you to basically trigger any kind of interaction with UI elements. So it enables you to render data or to trigger specific requests or logic based on user interaction. And then you have authentication, which enables you to build authentication flows and integrate with different authentication services. And you have settings, which control basically your project and the connected domains. And yeah, today we have 2 projects for you that we're gonna display quickly. The first one is the weather application. Basically, really a simple application with only 2 requests and some connections on the canvas. And then a more complex application that Bailey built, and which is basically going forward a community application for Wized, and forum built completely on Wized, and yeah, just a place where Wized users can connect and find some content to develop themselves further. All right, with no further ado, let's jump into the first weather application. So first of all, the beginning of every Wized project is a Webflow site. There is no way we only support Webflow sites, no other site builders. We are Webflow only. And basically you build out every element you later want to use in Wized inside of Webflow first. So for example, you build an input element over here, you build an icon here, some text, and then the second step is to basically think of all the elements you want to use in Wized itself so that you want to connect to data. And those elements, you give an attribute. You give the WEL attribute, which stands for Wized element. And you give it a name. In here, it's maybe hard to read, but it says input city. Maybe that's better. Input city. Then we have, for example, here some attribute with weather temperature. We have weather icon over here. And we have weather details over here. So that's basically the preparation that allows you to then connect our UI elements with Wized. And in the second step, we go into Wized itself. Let me just go here into the projects. Lot of projects. And in here, what you do first inside of Wized is you connect the APIs and the apps you want to use. So we want to use Airtable to look up the icons for the specific weather condition. And of course, we want to load the current weather from somewhere. And in this case, in this example, we are using the Open Weather Map Open API. Yeah. The second thing we need to do, of course, is if we want to display data, we need to load data. So we create a data in request for loading the weather. And in here, we choose our Open Weather Map API, basically the API we just created here in My Apps. We specify the URL endpoint. This is information that's always provided by the API documentation. So there's nothing you need to come up with yourself. That's basically just some documentation you need to read and basically just follow the instructions on how to access this API you want to use. You select the method, And in this example, we're just executing this request on the server. If you would uncheck this, you can also execute requests on the client, which just make it a little bit faster. And then we have a couple of URL parameters we need to configure here. That's also specific to the API you use. So basically, the API description will give you the instructions on which kind of URL parameters and which kind of parameters it expects to return you the right result. And in here, in that case, it's this key, which stands probably for query, and it wants the value of the city. And the way we connect input fields inside of this value field is that we simply go in here in our data menu, and in here, as we gave an attribute to the input field before, it automatically appears, and we are able to select it into our data field. And that's basically the way how you connect your real-life input data to your Wized requests. Then the app ID is static. That's just some information we needed to create to use this API, and we select metric as a unit. Then the second thing is we, of course, want to trigger that request in some way. So a request by itself is just a request, and if it doesn't get triggered, it doesn't run. So we need to find a way to trigger it. And in that example over here, what we want to do is we want to trigger it whenever this input field changes. So let's say we put in London over here. The moment we press enter, or we click outside of the field, it automatically loads us the weather. So that's the trigger we want. And the way we achieve this is by actions. So we have this here. We'll just call it trigger weather load. And in here, we basically select the attribute that this trigger applies on. In Wized, everything is attribute-based. So every trigger is also attribute-based. And that means that in here, we can simply select of all the available options, and that we basically created ourselves in our Webflow project over here. And in this case, it's input city. As the next step, we have the configuration for this action. And what we want to do here is we want to build an on-change action. So basically, we want to add a listener to this input field that triggers when this input field is changed. And when it's changed, we want to perform a specific action. We can either set a cookie, set a variable, or perform a request. And perform a request, of course, is what we want to do. We could add a conditional logic if it only should run in special conditions. And we then can select the actual request that we want to trigger. In that case, it's load weather. So that's the reason why a change in this input field triggers the request. So we have those two parts now. We have the trigger, we have the first request, and now it's about to display the information that the request returns. Because in this right side over here, we want to display the response and we want to show the weather for the location that was inputted over here. And the way we do that, again, is with actions. So we basically create an action for every of the different texts and contents that we want to replace. First of all, let's see how this looks for the temperature, for example. So we again go to apply to, and in here we again have the attribute weather temperature, which we can see we gave over here, weather temperature. And then we simply have the configuration set text, text type plain text, and then we simply put in the text we received from the API. So we have this load weather parameter over here. Right, let me quickly execute this. So we have some fresh data. Okay, so you basically select the value of the request, of the item of the request that you want to connect with this, with this attribute here. And in this specific case, we also added a math round function around it, so that it basically, because the API itself returns a value with some decimals, and we want to round it to make it 32 degree exactly. So yeah, and then we just repeat that for every other text that we want to display here. So for example, for the clouds, for the conditions, and we basically use all the attributes we got back from our REST API and connect them with every and each element where we want to display data. So yeah, that was a really simple use case, I think, for Wized. And of course, it's only one of the simplest things you can build. And I think now Bailey will go into detail about some more complex applications and logging systems and what you can build with Wized.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Jonas. So on our site, blackpeak.ca, I have some pretty exciting stuff. So we have authentication with both email, password, and Google authentication as well. Once you're actually authenticated in, we have a whole form system. We're also using Webflow CMS in conjunction with Wized, which is super, super powerful. Okay, so just as Jonas was talking about attributes, we have the live site built out here, and then all of our attributes are set in Webflow. I have this button here called login. I can go email, password, and then login after that. But I'm going to go login with Google. And another thing you can do is you can do conditional visibility with items. So you'll notice when I click on login with Google here, it's going to show that little loading circle really quickly, redirect me to Google. I can choose my account. It's going to transfer the auth token, load my data super fast, and you can say it says, "Good morning, Bailey." We're using also some conditional logic here to show conditional text based off morning, evening, afternoon, etc. And then I have Webflow CMS data loaded here. Really exciting part is down here at the forum. So you can see these images here are actually live from recent posters in Xano. So the backend for this app is using Xano, which is a very popular database tool. And I'm essentially running a query to get the most popular users from. I'm getting a query for the people that have posted the most. And I get those 3 icons, display them here. I have my image here. You can scroll down. I have some other posts that are loaded. You can see this one's coming 3 minutes ago, another one 2 days ago, and etc. And just to show you the speed of this here, so I'm going to click on this, and that triggered a Webflow interaction to open up this modal. And then now I can create a title. I'll call it test title. I'm not used to a European keyboard. And then we'll just say test body. And when I click post, it's going to do a couple things. The Z is in the Y. I don't know why. It's going to do a couple things. So it is going to send that request, show a little loading circle, and then when that request is successfully completed, and only when it has successfully completed, I'm running some JavaScript to click this X here. And this X is running a Webflow interaction. So it's really powerful because you can get Wized to trigger Webflow interactions to make your site completely smooth and seamless. And you'll see here when I click post, it's going to post that. And that's like, what, 200 milliseconds, 150 milliseconds or so? Crazy fast. In the past, you would have had to use Zapier, use a form submit, send that to Zapier. Zapier takes 5, 10 seconds to load. Then you have to manually refresh the website or use JavaScript to refresh the website after that. Now with Wized, all that happened on page, no reloading, under 100, 150 milliseconds or so, and we're good to go there. On top of that, this form here is we have an array. With Wized v2, now we can do arrays within arrays. So we're having nested arrays, which is crazy powerful. And if I click on this comment option here, I can go and write a comment. And when I post this, it already knows which item the parent is, because the comment button here is a part of that one array. So when I click this, it identifies its parent. I click post, it's going to refresh everything, and as you can see, it loaded as a comment there. which is super, super powerful. If I go to the back end here, and one thing I actually show as well is we have image uploading with Wized. And this doesn't use Webflow's native file upload at all. So you don't need to pay for that. And it's really, really powerful what you can do here. I can go into account settings. I can click on this option here. I don't know what images I want to have as an option to upload. We'll use a screenshot. Sure, why not? I can open that, click the upload button. It's going to upload that, show me a preview of that there. And then if I want, I can change my name to whatever. Test is fine. And then it's going to load that data immediately. Shows test. And as you can see down here, it has already loaded that new image. So it is super, super powerful there. On top of that, authentication-wise, so you know I have this logout button here. So I'm going to go and log out. It's going to clear my cookie and redirect me here. Might not be working completely. Let's go here. I'm just going to go to new tab. OK, so I just open it incognito. That way I'm not authenticated. And as under my resources, I can see I have some tutorials and some clonables, et cetera. So this tutorial is gated authentication-wise. So when people visit this page, we check to see if they're authenticated. If not, we redirect them. And this isn't using JavaScript with MemberStack. For MemberStack uses JavaScript to hide items, and you can kind of get around that a little bit if you're a little bit techie. So if I click into this, it'll redirect me back, as you saw there. And what's happening is it's actually making a request to Xano to load that data. And so if the user is not authenticated, it never actually loads the data. The data never hits even the back end of the site, so the user can go in and view that data there. So it's super powerful in terms of security-wise and flexibility. Jonas was saying on stream, Wiz is as secure as you build it to be, right? You can build this thing to be super secure, and it's super, super flexible with that. Do you want to add anything, Jonas?
Maybe in terms of data security and security in general, because I think that's also a hot topic, maybe not so much in the US, more in Europe. Basically Wiz also, the Wiz doesn't process any of the data of your application. Wiz only triggers the request to the backend you specify. So Wiz doesn't have a database itself. It's not storing data. It's basically the configuration and layer that allows your website to do stuff that it couldn't do otherwise. But we don't, we don't do the saving of the requests, or we don't log any of the authentication info. We don't even it doesn't even get through us in some way. So basically, the security of any Wiz application depends on the security settings you configure in the backend you use. And that can be harder or simpler for beginners, but in general, that's the rule, and the best rule for security is to disallow everything by default, and then to just allow it step by step based on what you need.
Do you want to do questions?
Yeah, maybe it's a good time for questions before Bailey jumps into how he built this commenting application.
Any questions?
Hey, my question is, what I see here is things that, like a forum, I can use something like Circle, right, which integrates nicely with different existing applications. So I think the proposal here is like you can build it yourself, right, with what seems like a little bit of effort. So my question is like, where do you see this fit, right? Is it like I want Circle, but I have maybe 40–50% of the functionality that I want to change? Or are there like lighthouse use cases that you think that you're kind of uniquely positioned to solve, and you'll build, starter packs for people to get started and adapt? So is this, does that make sense of the question?
Yeah, I think it totally does. Maybe Bailey, you can say a couple of words regarding that, as you have used Wized for almost a year now in your daily agency work.
I think it's two things. I think it's customizability and scalability. If you're using a third-party application, you're limited by what they are building, right? And you're also limited by branding of how they allow you to edit CSS, etc. With this, you have a couple things. A, your users are on platform the whole time. You can build a fully on-platform experience. They don't have to go to another site to go to the forum. They don't have to have the forum on Slack and chat, or the forum on Circle and the chat on Slack. Everything is on your application. And to segue into customizability, you can design and build whatever you want. And so if you want a feature down the road that Circle doesn't have, maybe you're running into the situation of looking to switch to another forum app, right? And then maybe that situation happens again where that second forum app doesn't have something you need to have to grow further. With Wized, you can build whatever you need and you can scale it to your needs exactly, right? So you can build any feature you can really think of that's possible. So scalability and customizability is why I would go with Wized over a third-party app that's already pre-built.
Yeah, and I think as well, Wized is built to really benefit from the power of Webflow. So, I mean, there are 1,000 solutions out there for like pretty much any niche use case, any like SaaS small application that you could use for building like either, as you said, like Circle for a forum, or maybe some other tool for a trivia game, or there are niche tools for everything. But the power of Wized is it allows you to basically design it by yourself as you like it, and then you are able to build it exactly as you want it. And that's, I think, what a lot of clients of Webflow agencies like, this flexibility in design, this like possibility to really get it done the way and in the customizability that you want. And yeah, Wiz is not restricted to forums or to booking systems or to weather applications. It can really basically build every kind of application where you load data, display data, and want to change data.
Yeah. And to add to that, most of the clients that come to us, they already have their front end in Webflow, and they've been using it for years, and their back end is built in some old, antiquated code base that hasn't been touched in 10 years, and they're like, Webflow is really good for the front end, but our back end's a mess, and how do we fix this problem? That's the perfect use case, because we get them on Webflow for their back end, just add on to their back end, build it in Wized, and it's the best of both worlds. Everything is in one place.
Yeah, and maybe it's also a good moment to talk about why I actually built Wized and how I came to that point. So I was a Webflow developer myself for a lot of years, 3 or 4 years. I also was a software developer on the side and learned that, but I basically built like every kind of web application. I built the front end with Webflow, exported it, and then built like typical Vue or React applications out of it. So I knew the whole process, but I really wanted to stay in Webflow, not need this export process, and I just thought that there must be a way to basically put all the recurring tasks that you need to do in such a front-end framework like Vue or React, like authentication, loading data, displaying data, and saving data into just one UI. And I basically copied, in terms of the logic, in terms of the thinking, I copied traditional front-end frameworks like Vue or React in terms of what they can do, and I tried to put it into a no-code way that is easy to understand for people that are not very familiar with that yet. And that's why we built also our intelligence center, where we basically have tutorials and really will explain everything from the beginning on, and build a lot of demo applications, do a lot of live streams, release a lot of education for that tool, so that the learning curve gets addressed.
Before we take another question, I also want to add on, Wized v2 now has clonable functionality. And the move to attributes with Wized v2 is super powerful, because in Webflow, you have symbols. Now with attribute uses in Wized v2, we have clonable functionality. That forum I showed you there, that forum is a whole symbol in Webflow. I can copy that, paste it on another page, and it will all run the exact same. I don't have to reattach anything. I don't have to do any more work. It's all symbol-like functionality with the use of attributes now as well. And the Wiz site, as well as our site, Blackpeak, will both be having clonables on the site. They're going to be super, super powerful, where people can get right in, clone their project, start right away, and hit the ground running.
Yeah, and you can even not only clone components with Wized, you can also clone entire projects. So you can go into settings here, and you simply click clone project, allow cloning, and then it spits you out a link that you can share to fellow Wized users. And whenever they click on that link, it will open up a UI that has some simple steps on how to clone this project, and you can simply save it and have the same configurations, the same settings that everyone built or anyone built in your Wized account. So you can build like really flexible UI and component libraries and project libraries, and make it really easy also to learn and walk through for new users.
Any other questions?
This is a simple question. Where does Wized live? Like where are you? So if I'm passing data to this controller that's then integrating with models and displaying to the view, where is that?
It's pretty easy. So you have this embed code setting over here, and this is basically the code you embed into your page. So it's a simple script tag that you paste into the head of your site. It loads and executes the whole configuration that you configure inside of this configurator. In general, we have a backend, of course, I think here in the United States. It's hosted here in the States. But this backend actually isn't called for most of what you do in Wized. So when you configure, for example, an application with Firebase or Supabase or Xano, there is no call at all going out to Wized. There's no intermediary. We aren't an intermediary. We are only an application that allows your site to perform superpowers and to perform those things that it couldn't do before, like those API requests and the displaying the connections and the data that comes back.
If I can add on to this, so for example, our site here, we're using Xano as the backend. Same with Xano, Supabase, Google Firebase. You can choose where you want your server location to be. So I have ours in Canada because I'm a Canadian company. And when you make that call, Wiz is just telling Chrome, your browser, to make an API call to this site. So Wiz is telling your client, make an API call to that server. Wiz doesn't touch it at all. So if you have, you can set your server to be European, anywhere. And if your users are all in Europe, it will go to that closest data center, and you'll be good to go.
So if you're cloning from a Wized app, what happens to the connected database? I'm obviously going to need my own database. How does that work?
That's a good one. So with Xano, I can't speak to other applications, but this is actually something we're going to do with Xano. Xano, database-wise, we can clone databases as well as clone functions within those databases. So what we're going to do is when you're cloning a project, for example, one of our projects that has Xano as a database, you're going to clone the Wiz site, clone the Webflow site, and then also clone the Xano functions and Xano database. There'll be some information you're going to have to input, and we'll probably build it so you have a couple input lines, you enter your custom code, and then we spit out all the links that you need to clone it. But it's super straightforward, and the Xano database and everything will clone as well.
Yeah, and inside of Wized, of course, all the sensitive data will get removed in the cloning. But in case you would have like an Airtable API connection, for example, over here, the Airtable API key would get removed in the cloning.
Yeah.
So you would just need to have to reconnect your table and your database, but don't rebuild any of the logic.
Well, I had a question about Webflow's membership is in beta right now, and something that I'm hearing from clients a lot of the time is, okay, there's membership functionality I can add to my site, but can it do X? I think my question would be, do you see Wized as a tool that could extend the functionality of Webflow's memberships, or something that would be used as an alternative to?
It's 100% built as an extension. So for now, as we know of, there is no way to integrate with memberships itself, no external way. But as soon as there is any possibility, we will make it, of course, possible. And in general, Wiz is not built for replacing memberships. There are very, very valid cases for memberships. Like if you want to build a simple membership system with payments and user and hidden content, it's a great case for memberships. And Wiz is there if you have user-related content, if you want to work with your own databases, if you want to really optimize performance and work with huge databases. And if you want to build custom authentication, so if you want to integrate with social logins, all of that kind of functionality. is perfect for Wized.
I think to add on to that, Wized, if you're talking about just gating content, like you just want to have email, password, just to gate content, it's like using a lawnmower on a bonsai tree, right? Like it's overpowered and it'll work, yeah, but memberships is a really good use case for that.
So expanding in there in terms of memberships, when you were showing gated content and the combination between Webflow CMS and external databases, when you're doing the demo ISO flash of information, so how actually are you right now gating the content so it doesn't get bypassed by just deactivating JavaScript and those things?
So that content there was actually from the CMS itself. So with that, what we can do on that page, we don't have a preloader built, but we can build a preloader and actually make all that content hidden and then show that once it's all loaded. So it's all gated there.
I think, if I understand your question correctly, it's about loading protected content, right? So normally when using Wized, you don't have the content of your site pre-rendered. You build template pages, basically, that are just placeholder div blocks with no information inside of it. Maybe placeholder information. And then all the real information gets loaded by Wized and filled in. And those requests itself are authenticated. So no JavaScript disabling can bypass that because you need JavaScript to run those requests.
To add on to that, as Jonas was saying, for sensitive data, the API call to the server isn't actually made until you're properly authenticated, right? Once you're authenticated, then the API call is made, then the data is retrieved. If you're not authenticated, the data is never retrieved, so you can't unhide something and show it. But for CMS, that's not so sensitive data, you can just hide it and you'll be good to go.
Yeah, you can build all of those possibilities with Wized. You can completely either hide content or build it however you like. However, the most secure way is, of course, to do it inside of the requests.
And for me, what I show you, the tutorials, they're not crazy sensitive. Like I wouldn't really care that much if someone really wanted to hack into it and properly get that content. I don't really care that much. But for sensitive data, we have to wait for the API call to authenticate.
Actually, now this is more about the authentication portion. I know that you guys are authenticating there with Google, with Firebase, and pretty much everything that we can do. Now, how does it work when you have multiple systems and you want to tie them together with something like OpenID? Do you think that's something that right now Wiz can serve? So you can have a single point of authentication, you go to your database, then that does the Firebase and then comes back?
Are you talking about SSO?
Yes.
Yes, it works. So for FinSuite, for example, we have built this kind of flow. You know that FinSuite has like a FinSuite login, and that's basically our SSO, our FinSuite SSO. And this SSO, and we use, for example, Auth0 for that, which is an SSO service, and Auth0 is integratable into Xano. So together with Xano, you can simply build those kinds of requests. And at the end, it looks exactly the same as Bailey showed with his Google login, where you basically do a call which gives you like a login URL for Google, and then Xano is doing the authentication with Auth0 in the background.
So to expand our thinking on this as well, we want to do live streams on the site, but we also want to gate those live streams potentially to people that are only members of the site. Vimeo has a good live stream option, and they also use Auth0 as well. And so what we're thinking is checking to see the authentication token with Xano, and then running that past Vimeo as well to make sure that's authenticated, and we allow the users in. So with Auth0, you can authenticate with any application that provides support with Auth0 itself. So it's not just Google and your typical Facebook, the social accounts that you can use to sign in with. You could do GitHub down the road. There's endless possibilities of what you could authenticate with.
So what are the best places? I know you said you have tutorials on the site for those of us who are looking to stay on top of what's coming next. What are the best places to go for community events for this that are coming out?
So we have created the, how we call it, Intelligence Center. It's help.wiz.com, and there we will basically release more and more content over the coming weeks and months. So we have, for the start, we have 3 paths that we're starting with. It's a beginner path, intermediate path, and pro path. And all of those will cover Wiz in like different depths. Like with pro functions, for example, in the pro plan, beginner functionality in the beginner plan. Other than that, people like Bailey and Blackpeak will also create resources and live streams for the community. So the best place probably to start is either our Discord or our online forum right now. In the long term, it will definitely be the forum, and we will move away from the Discord.
For now, the Discord's popular. So if you're not in the Discord, get in. It's a good time. People ask a bunch of questions there, and there's a bunch of knowledge. It's not a dead Discord. There are people chatting, so it's a good place to be.
Yes, but long term we are that to our forum. So our forum can and is also used as well.
So for the clonables, does it have all like the Wiz settings baked into that, or is it so it's like you can have like a SaaS in a box or like Airbnb? So how does that work? When like do you download it from Wiz website for a clonable, or is it on the Webflow site?
Yeah, a clonable always has 3 parts. First, the Webflow project itself. Second, the Wiz project. And then third is if it has a database, it could also use, for example, only public APIs, then there would be no third part, because the third-party APIs are always the same. But if you have a database, like external database or a Superbase database or a Firebase database or an Airtable base, then you would need to clone that as well.
We're right on time there for a good break. That's amazing. Give it up for Wized. I think a lot of us who have been using Webflow for a long time have been looking for some of this functionality all over the place and trying to figure out how you do this. We've been, trying to integrate Integromat or Make, Zapier, and all these different tools. And so now to see some of this coming with Wized, also to see Webflow working on Logic and some of the things they're coming out with, it's a really exciting time, I think, to be going into this whole space and seeing products like this evolve. And just different things popping up in the ecosystem, right? It seems like the Webflow ecosystem is opening up, and it's exciting to see how that will kind of lead over the next couple years.